Hello, Tom Levecki here with the latest edition of the New Theory podcast. Today is a very, very special podcast, and we have a very special guest today, Joseph Alvaro, and he is the author of I'm One of the Lucky Ones, Remembering a Soulmate, and we're going to go through his special journey today. Joseph, welcome to the New Theory podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thank you, Tom, for having me on.
Now, you are, in your, professional life, you are a very accomplished person. If you want to kind of give a little bit of background of who you are, where you grew up, and then a little bit about your story.
Well, I grew up in Michigan, and I came here for graduate school to attend NYU's graduate film school. And then after graduating, I started working in the film and television industry in New York City, and eventually worked my way up to producing television commercials for agencies and then directing commercials. So I've had about 35 years of television production, and then met my wife in Manhattan. We got married, had three beautiful children, and we moved when the kids were small to New Jersey just to have a larger home in the backyard. So we lived here for quite a few years, and then unfortunately about 10 years ago, my wife passed away. And she was good friends with Matt Zoller Seitz, who's the co-creator of The Lucky Ones. He's a television film critic for RogerEbert.com and Vulture Magazine. And she had met him years ago when she was a publicist for HBO, and she was promoting The Sopranos. She launched the show, and that's when the two of them met. And then his wife and myself, the four of us, became friends, and our children. And then about 13 years ago, his first wife passed away, just very unexpectedly, leaving him with a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Wow.
And 3.5 years later, my wife passed away. So we were out one day, two of us, he lived in Brooklyn, I lived in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and we got together in Manhattan on a snowy night, and just talking and about our lives and children and being single dads and dealing with all the things that you deal with after you lose a spouse. And he brought up, he said, he was asking, how do you deal with this? You lost your daughter, you lost your wife. How do you deal with this? And I said, well, I consider myself one of the lucky ones. I had a wife for 27 years that I adored, loved, and she was my soulmate. I have nothing to regret. I have no bitterness. I mean, most people don't get that in their lives. And he looked at me and he said, it's so funny because I was in a bereavement group, and I was walking out the door with this older gentleman, Marvin, who was in his 70s. And my partner, Matt, had said to him, Marvin, don't you wish sometimes you'd never met your wife so you wouldn't have to deal with this kind of grief? And Marvin looked at him and said, no, we're one of the lucky ones. We're lucky. Most people live their whole lives and they never have this. And so when I said, I'm one of the lucky ones, he told me about Marvin saying that Matt was one of the lucky ones. And then from there, we started talking about how could we do something to celebrate the lives of people that we are lucky to have known. And that's how we came upon this, doing little stories. So we created a website and started shooting stories. We sat down with people and shoot 5-minute, 6-minute stories with them in their home or their place of business about someone, whether it was a spouse, a friend, a colleague. And then our publicist said to us, why don't you guys do short ones, do man on the street stories? So we started shooting, we went out on 2 cameras and started shooting with the crew and started shooting little interviews with people on the street, just random, at parks and fairs and festivals and gatherings. And then we cut them down to a minute and put them on our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Lucky Ones TV. And the response has been amazing. I mean, to talk to people about someone that they're lucky to have known, and people just come forward with, their friends, their cousins, their colleagues, it's just amazing stuff. Girl Scout leaders, patients they've had that have taught them things. I mean, one fellow we interviewed was Christopher Reeve's private nurse. And he started telling us about what Christopher taught him about humility and kindness and things like that. He said it was amazing. So you never know. We run into, the stories are universal, and it touches, it brings our common humanity. It's part of our common humanity, and it brings us all together, something that we all experience.
So you mentioned. So I want to focus first on your story, and I definitely want to also, and I'm glad you brought up Matt as well. Is unfortunately you lost your wife to cancer, and then unfortunately you lost your daughter shortly. There were, I think, I think you said 3.5 years after.
No, I lost my
This
wife.
is national.
She actually,
I'm sorry.
my daughter committed suicide 9 months after her mother died.
Oh, 9 months. I'm sorry. It's three and a half between. I
Matt,
got it. That was
yeah.
Matt's choice. Sorry. Okay. And this is national. And again, for me and for half our listeners, and we're super sorry for your losses. This is National Suicide Awareness Month, and obviously that losing a mother, losing a wife is extremely traumatic, and has a whole host of challenges. For people listening, and it is National Suicide Awareness Month, what are some things, to look out for, and what are some things that, like, is there pink flags, is there red flags, is everything a red flag?
I don't think, yeah, it's very interesting, Tom. A lot of people ask me that question. We've done a bunch of interviews with people who, mostly younger people in their 20s, early 20s, mid 20s.
Yeah.
Talking about friends who have committed suicide. It's amazing. Myself, I don't think I think when a person commits suicide, they don't tell anyone. They just do it.
Yeah.
There's no warning. They just do it. When there's warning signs and people and try to commit suicide, they're reaching out for help. When someone wants to kill themselves, they don't tell anybody, they just do it. They don't try to like feign like, oh, woe is me and someone help me, because that's not their objective. Their objective is to end their life and to relieve this misery that they're in for whatever reason. So I don't know that there's any warning signs. My daughter was a straight A student, a 3 varsity athlete, modeled for 17 magazines. She was 6 feet tall, beautiful girl, who commanded, her presence just commanded your attention when she walked in a room. Everyone wanted to know who she was. She had, she was that kind of a person, and you would never suspect that she would do something like that. People that have known her, that knew her for years and years, teachers came up and said, of all the children I've taught, this is the last child I would ever think to do this, because of just her persona. But so you never know. In her case, her mother passed away, and then my brother-in-law died in a skydiving accident in April. So my wife died in November. He died in April. She lost a friend of hers, mom, died of cancer in April. And then one of our uncles by marriage, a close family relative, passed away of cancer, and in July, and she took her life the night of his funeral after we buried him. So
oh my God,
you really don't know. I think when people exhibit signs, excuse me, I think when people exhibit signs, then and you can intervene. But I think most people that want to kill themselves don't tell anybody. They just do it.
Wow. Now, one of the now I remember I was probably about 20 years ago. I attended a funeral for a colleague that passed. She did commit suicide, and essentially, I never met her family. It was through work, and I believe her sister was there, and she was asking me questions. Who are you? How do you know her and stuff? And her sister's like, oh my God, like I didn't know she had all this. She had all this. Why would she do what she did? And I think that the thought is the person who doesn't really realize they have all of that. They don't realize that they might have more friends and more support that they have, and that they're not alone and that kind of stuff. So what do you do? I agree with you where kind of like they're going to do what they're going to do, which I do agree with. But what do you do if you have some inkling and you want people to know they have more? What's a good way to do it? Because I think some people, when it gets rough, they want to help, and they wind up like old school people might yell and be like, what's wrong with you? Versus, listening and learning. But what do you do? How do you make somebody aware that they have more in their life? What do you recommend?
I don't know, because, it's interesting. I've talked to friends and family members about my daughter, her suicide. And I think a lot of people, her included, when they are upset and feeling depressed, they don't realize that tomorrow's another day. You know, just because these things are happening today, especially with younger children, or, you know, when I say children, I mean young adults,
Yeah.
teenagers, they don't have the perspective to know that, you know, bad things can happen today, but 20 years from now, it's different, or 2 weeks from now, it's different, or a year from now, it's different. They don't have that perspective. They live in the immediate moment, and they don't ever realize that, you know, that there's a sweep of your life, and things change and evolve, and what's today doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be that way tomorrow. I think a lot of people that
Yeah.
commit suicide just don't have that perspective, and especially with younger kids, I don't think they have that perspective. An older person, if they commit suicide, probably has thought themselves, well, I've lived long enough and I'm done. You know, where a younger person thinks, I can't live this. God, it's going to be like this the rest of my life. And they just don't have that perspective, you know, of life and events that go on that you overcome. So I don't know. I don't have any answers, and I don't know why. I mean, I couldn't tell you why my daughter killed herself. I don't know why. At her eulogy, the priest that did the mass said, you know, he said, we shouldn't ask why. Only she knows why. We can only guess. So we should stop asking why, and just accept the fact that she had actually done this, and then celebrate her life for who she was. You know, celebrate the things she did. Her life didn't define her. Just because she killed herself did not define who she is. It just happened to be the last moment of her life. Everything else up to that point defined who she was and how she treated other people and how she's remembered. And that's what we do with the lucky ones. We don't dwell on death. We don't dwell on crying and mourning. What we do is we celebrate the good things that person brought to the world, what they gave you, how they affected your life, how they changed you, how they made you a better person, and why you were lucky to have known them. So that's our mission. Our mission is to basically give people a way to talk about those people that have passed away that meant something to them in a manner that is celebratory. So that's what we do. We look for stories of people to celebrate the lives of other people. They're like mini biographies. It's no different than watching an HBO biography for an hour and a half of Robin Williams. Only ours is 30, 60 seconds or 5 minutes, depending on the format that we're filming in.
Wow. So how has, again, you dealt with literally unspeakable tragedies. How has that shaped you, you know, prior than to now, as a man, as a father? You know, how has it shaped you?
Well, I lost my father in that same year too. He was hit by a truck. He was actually left on the road to die. It was insane. We lost 5 immediate family members in 14 months in 2009, 2010. I kind of look at life now very differently. I don't take it as seriously. I mean, not that I don't take life seriously. I just don't take what happens in life so seriously. Try not to let things that are really inconsequential bother me. And I look at life differently. You know, people say, you know, with this COVID, oh, you're afraid. I'm like, no, I'm not afraid. If I get it, I get it. If I die, I die. I mean, it's just, I can't go around living my life sealed hermetically in a cocoon. I mean, I don't want to live life like that. And having experienced the death of numerous family members, I kind of look at it differently. I don't look at death as something to be afraid of. I just don't any longer. I don't fear it. I don't look at it as, you know, I don't welcome it, certainly, but I don't fear it. I don't have the same kind of apprehensions that I guess I had beforehand, having experienced all this other stuff.
Got it. Now, you know, and again, I know people listening, and, you know, typically when you listen to this stuff, people will reflect on their own situation. And the fact that you said, you know, hey, you know, I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones, which is amazing. And people may or may not feel that way. Is that something that you adopted pretty quickly? You know, it's like, damn, I deal with all the stuff, and yeah, it is. Okay,
I guess it's part of
okay,
my makeup. I mean, you know, my partner dealt with it much differently. You know, he dealt with the
yeah,
death of his wife much, much different. Now, the death of his second wife, he's been, he's dealt with it more like I have. In fact, he just did a video. We just did a video of him. We're actually going to cut it later on this afternoon, finish cutting it. But he talked about the experience of losing his second wife, and talked about how lucky he was to have, you know, here's a fellow in his 50s saying, you know, who's lost 2 wives in 13 years, and said, I'm lucky to have had 2 women that I truly loved, you know. And
yeah.
that's something that a lot, you know, there was a friend of mine, I wanted to interview her. She's a widow, and I approached her to interview her, and she said to me, yeah, Joseph, no. I'm like, why, Eileen? And she said, well,
Yeah.
not everyone had a marriage like you had. I said, but Eileen, you were married for like 50 some years. You had 3 kids. She's like, yeah, that's true. And I was like, yeah, right. So people will live their whole lives and with a spouse and not be in love, not have that connection. And so it goes back to what Marvin said. Hey, Matt, not everyone is lucky in life and has what you had, you know,
Yeah.
which is someone that you love dearly, that you have a soulmate. So I think, you know, I
Now,
think a lot, I'm sorry.
yeah. No, go, finish the thought.
Well, I was thinking, you know, a lot of the way we deal with death in our country is a little, I'd say closed-minded in some regards. We don't, you know, oftentimes we don't want, when someone dies and someone starts talking about them, people don't want to hear about it. They get very uncomfortable. It's like, wait, no, this person's life should be celebrated. And when you tell stories about that person and how they lived and how they affected other people, you create a history for other people to know that person, and maybe insights that they had never even thought of or experienced before. So I think, in a sense, celebrating someone's life is much healthier than mourning their life, or mourning their death, actually, because it's their life is what it's about, and we're all going to die. So, you know, why not celebrate those people? Because we're going to be in that situation. And I want people to speak kindly of me when I die. I want people to say, yeah, I was lucky to know Joseph. You know, he taught me this, or he brought me this, you know, into my life. He changed me in this way or that way. That's what I think important. I think that's why we're all here, aren't we? Is to make the world a better place.
And absolutely. And then what can we find in the book, and, you know, who should read it?
I'm one of the lucky ones. Remembering a Soulmate is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And then our website, luckyonestv.com, you can see all these wonderful stories. And at Lucky Ones TV, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You know, and watch these little 1-minute stories that we put up. They're wonderful. They're great. It's a celebration of our common humanity. It's really something quite special. Now, unfortunately, with COVID, we haven't been able to shoot for a while, but, you know, we will again. We'll go out and shoot soon. You know,
That's amazing. So that's amazing. So we'll put the links below to the website, which has the ability to get the book, to watch some of the shorts, and you know what? Kiss your loved ones. Remember the ones we lost. And Joseph, listen, this was. Folks, we had to fit this in because it is National Suicide Awareness Month, and we're going on the tail end of the month. But I felt it was important to have Joseph on. I appreciate your call, and we're the lucky ones to be hearing about your story, and we appreciate your time on the New Theory podcast.
Thank you. You have a good day, Tom.
You too, buddy.